Put it on the tube.
Can I tell my kids I'm a YouTuber now? They'll think I'm so cool.
Oh yeah. All right. What's up, everyone? Give us a little bit. We'll get started here shortly. Here. Punch this into the chat. And pin that. All right. Copy that. And then I'm going to put this up on the main Fire Nuggets page real quick. And like I said, I'll cut all this in the beginning too. So we'll just wait for a few people to pop on here.
It's on the Fire Nuggets YouTube.
Yeah, I just put the link in the chat. But yes, Nick, I think you can tell your son you're a YouTuber.
Sweet.
Oh, we got 3 watching. Snap.
No, pressure's on, boys.
Oh, get in there.
The comments turned off.
No, I just submitted a comment on the chat. It was oh, get in there. Gosh, hawk.
I'm not seeing any chat.
You're not seeing any chat?
You seen anything, Kyle?
No, man, I'm not looking at it though. That's probably why I'm not seeing it.
That
Hmm.
would work. It's a good point.
I pull it up.
How many people we got watching right now?
5.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see the comments are turned off, is what it says.
Okay, 1 sec here.
Okay. Yeah, I got 4 watching down there. All right. Thanks for staying with us, everybody. Just give us another minute or two. We're getting this all kind of ironed out right now. This is our first time, so please be gentle.
All right. Live on YouTube. All right. Got the chat going.
Need some juggling going on.
I
Which one of you
know.
guys can juggle?
Which
Both.
probably Nick.
Probably both. I don't see any chats yet. If you can listen to this and if you can hear this right now, why don't you try throwing something in the chat? I'm not seeing anything on my end yet. You seen anything yet, JB, on your end?
Yeah, Ashley just did a test.
Okay. I don't know why, but I'm not seeing that. I don't know if anyone else is able to do that or not.
Well, it might just be a host. I just got one from Colby Dodd.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, maybe it's just you who can see those, so you're gonna have to do the juggling.
All right, loud and clear in the Great White North. I don't know what that means, but
That's
I
Who's
Canadian.
that?
Canadian.
Is that
Okay,
Josh?
Peter VDB. All right,
Yeah, he's from
all
the
right,
51st state.
all right. It's starting to roll. You ready, Nick and Kyle?
Yeah, man. I was born ready.
All right,
Let's have
sweet.
some fun.
All right, so this is our first time doing live. We're only probably going to do this maybe once a month, once every other month, and we're only going to do it for good causes such as charities, as this. So this we're going to start calling them tactical tributes. We're going to bring in a guest. We're going to talk some tactics. We're bringing in one of the, in my opinion, one of the best when it comes to engine company tactics and operations. Kyle Romagus, always a pleasure to have him, and he's a friend. And you know we've gotten to teach together, and he's fucking awesome, right? So Kyle has agreed that what we're going to do is any all the money from this made is going to go to Next Rung, which a lot of you guys know. Blake Stinnett was involved in a accident at work. So we, as Fire Nuggets, actually have our own uh, donation set up for him already. This will be separate. This one will be going to Next Rung. Luckily, Dingus Fire Company, our good friends, Nick, he's a good big mentor of mine. Big mentor of mine. He will be donating $250 right to the start for that to get us started off. If you look at the pin in the chat, we actually have our own square where you can donate more. But along with that, as always, huge thank you to our normal sponsors, Key Hose, Elkhart Brass, and Vanguard Safety Wear. Really helpful, really big players in the game for us. So with that, everybody pretty much already knows you, Kyle. I don't even think we have to do an intro unless you want to.
No, man. You said too much already.
All right,
Appreciate
awesome,
the
brother.
kind words, my friend.
Yeah, man. So we're gonna kick this off, and literally this is chat driven. So Nick and I have a bunch of topics that we want to hit, but if we have any questions for Kyle, throw them in the chat. We will take care of it. So my one that I wanted to ask, Nick came up with six others. I came up with one. Uh, so you said the phrase "rescue is the objective." Kind of talk about that. Where what your beliefs are on that. I mean, I'm sure we have the same belief, but I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, the first time I ever heard that, my buddy Manny Barajas is the first guy that ever told me that, and it just like clicked with me. And it's so true, man, because the mindset of engine work, it gets clouded a lot by past experiences and past training evolutions and culture and everybody's fire departments. And for some reason engine work has like the pendulum has like swayed a lot to the opposite side of what's best for the unprotected civilian in most cases. And rescue being the objective is a great way to kind of sum up what the engine company's piece of that pie is. So a lot of guys, they have a mindset that rescue is a task on the fire ground. It's like when they're assigned to them. So like it's hard to get through to most companies, especially not busy companies, that rescue is everyone's objective, right? Like that's the objective of the whole first alarm. And we all have a piece of that pie. And I've tried to expand upon that in my lectures that I give and the hot classes that I go through with guys, is that the mindset of how we use the nozzle and where we use the nozzle and where we put water and the reasoning why opening more than closing is essentially making rescue the objective of the engine company as well. So like it's not just a truck task. It's not a task for anybody. It should be the mindset of everybody in the first alarm. Like, and once you can get guys to see the fireground through that lens, it tends to warp their decision making towards what's best for the unprotected civilian. And so, like, a lot of the engine work that's done in the past, like 20 years since I've been on the job, when I first came on, it was all based on what you can withstand, as the firefighter, and full protective equipment and respiratory protection. And like, it took some realization for me to actually realize that what I was doing on the fire ground wasn't necessarily best for the unprotected civilian. And I think a lot of guys have gone through that revelation as well. And it takes an understanding of what happens on the inside of a structure fire, specifically private dwelling, with the conditions inside the building and how we can change them with an open nozzle. So it takes a level of understanding that a lot of people don't really dive down into, because they see the job as seek and destroy, and it's destroy while you're seeking. All right.
It's a
Yeah,
beautiful
absolutely.
statement too, and it's so simple, so succinct, like 4 words: rescue is the objective. And I think what it does is it puts the why kind of out front, in front of everything, right? So we're going to lead with the why, or that's our purpose, and that's going to drive our process. And that process will then drive our product. And I think it's such a great tool to kind of realign everybody, no matter what class you're doing. I mean, to JB's point before we even got on here, it could be an ice rescue class, it could be a tech rescue class, or extrication class, or anything else that we do in this job. And just it refocuses you on the mission, on the purpose. And it's so simple, so succinct, and once you hear it, it's hard to not to forget that, really.
Yeah. It's
um
a great way to get. So, and it's like a Jedi mind trick for guys that don't have a good engine company culture, and their focus is not on the unprotected civilian of what we do with the nozzle. So,
yeah.
like, if you can get someone to agree that rescue is the mindset and the whole reason why we exist in the first place, like, anybody could put the fire out at an extent, but there's certain parts of these dwellings that can only be occupied by us, and the pizza man can't do it, or else he'd done it already, right? Like, the dad couldn't do it, or else he'd done it already, right? So, like, getting guys to agree to that mindset, that the unprotected civilian is the most important in the building at that point, and then you can start stepping away from that and start talking about, in my particular case, I can start talking about how we use the nozzle, like when we open the nozzle, where we put water, what we're trying to accomplish with the water, and at that point, once you start seeing the fire ground through the lens of the unprotected civilian, now we can start talking about gas contraction. Now we can start talking about flow path reversal, and how that aids in different parts of the building we're not occupying. So, like, kind of stems us into a couple different topics with that. But, like, I recently, about 4 years ago, took the blue card command program. And you guys, blue card holders, either of you guys? No?
No.
Okay. So the blue card command program, the first due engine is assigned fire attack and search, like, at the same time. Like, that's their model, is that the engine company is to perform fire attack and search. And, like, I can't do both of those things at the same time. I'm going to suck at both those things if I try to do them both at the same time. Right. So, like, if I've chosen fire attack as my main task, I can use fire attack as the objective of rescue on how I use that, like where I start gas contraction, how I bring oxygen into the building at high rates, and getting able to get that oxygen to occupy parts of the structure where I am not currently occupying. So, like, as the engine company, my job is to draw a line in the sand, draw a line in the sand of where we, as the protected firefighter, can occupy and search, between that and where we can't, as the protected firefighter, occupy and search. And we draw a line in the sand and we make one the other, right? So, like, the whole point is to make the building behave as much as possible. And if we can make the building behave in a way that will draw cool, clean air to the 3 foot level and below, where unprotected civilians are going to be, until we can get hands and eyes into those areas, then it's no longer a choice. Once you start seeing the fire ground through that lens, there's no choice at that point. Now it's a demand, you know.
I like how you worded that too. You talked about how, like, going back to the beginning of this kind of tangent that we had, you talked about how that's kind of a Jedi mind trick,
Mm-hmm.
getting everybody to focus on the reason that we're here, the reason that we're doing this. And it's a really good point. It's kind of this communication, this teaching hack to really like refocus everybody or reprioritize, realign, whatever the adjective is or verb is for this, to like, yeah, that's a really good point. I never thought about it that way. It kind of puts this new set of glasses on the students so they can see things slightly differently than they might have otherwise. Um, Real quick before we go too much further, if anybody has any questions, if you're new, just throw them in the chat. We're going to do our best to try to get to as many questions as we can during the next 2 hours or hour 45 here. Kyle, another topic here. You talk about a 701 Academy. Can you tell the listeners who might not be familiar with your concept of 701 Academy, just kind of what it is, where this came from, and maybe some of the things that you go over?
Yeah, so I actually got that term from our brothers to the South, our mutual aid company. So like when I took over the training division, one of the things that I did first was take over the Proby program and kind of change the way that we delivered skill set in the Proby program. So like we had a good system, but I thought at that point that it can be improved, right? Like, so as taking over the training division, one of the first things I did was start spending some time with the probies before they hit the apparatus bay floor. So like I would teach them how to stretch. I would teach them how to flow water stationary, teach them how to flow and move, like set them up for success on a 3-man engine. Because on a 3-man engine, that new guy's going to be isolated from his captain, right? So like, because the captain's the heel man. So the idea of the 701 Academy is that at the point where they arrive at your firehouse, they can stretch our hose loads because it's a little bit more difficult than how we stretch the flat load. So like I go through the flat load with them. I go through stationary nozzle work versus flow and move, one nozzle work while we're doing this, why we're putting water in certain places, 2.5 work. And by the time they get to your firehouse, they can at least execute, plan A, plan B, and plan C. And then you can start molding them in clay from there. But like that idea comes from the lack of training in the fire academy to get them to a point to where they can be successful without an immediate like left turn as soon as you get them right. Because like how good would it be if they all were delivered to us with this mindset, with the tactical abilities, that we want them to have, but it's just not feasible with the academies that we have, specifically in Texas. I can't speak to anywhere else, like Bonneville and Roberts and them are doing it good on the Pacific Northwest. Like that's the best engine academy that I've ever heard of, but not everybody's doing it like that. You know what I mean?
So somebody comes in at 7:01 in the morning because you
Yeah,
might get a call at 7:02, right? You're
correct.
prepping them for like this shit might go down any minute now.
Yeah, and that's the mind frame behind the name of it is like when they arrive at your apparatus bay floor, you only have so much time before the bell could go off. You know what I mean? So like having them prep to a point to where if they show up and at 7:01 you do get hit for the private dwelling fire, they can at least execute, the plan A, plan B. They know why they're doing it. They know how to put water in certain places. They know why they're stretching to certain places and how they can do it efficiently. And then it gives the captain the opportunity to mold their mindset and their tactical abilities and function within their particular company, but it gives them a head start to where they're not starting from square one.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. Okay, so this one sounds pretty similar to what happens to me all the time. 90% of good ideas fail to bad delivery or the deliverer.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it kind of goes back to rescue being the objective. Like that's a Jedi mind trick for the guy with the poor engine company culture or poor fireground culture, like delivering that message. So like say for instance, you're trying to change how a 30-year pipeman operates on the engine. And like you got to really finesse that message to a point to where you're not necessarily telling him he's doing something wrong or like he's done it wrong his entire career. Because as soon as you drop the ball on that, the wall goes up, right? Like you're not communicating anymore. Now you're just talking at the wall, but so like you have to finesse that in a way to where, and this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is like you got to get these dudes that have these big egos and experience on the fire ground. If you want them to change their culture of your either company or fire department or the way they interact with the fire ground, is that you have to first convince them of things they don't know they're agreeing to, and then circle back in the conversation. Like once you start meeting resistance with them, be like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Like I thought we were talking about rescue being the objective, right? Like I thought we were talking about the unprotected civilian when we first started this thing, because it's going to touch some emotional topics with them, and a lot of that has to do with their abilities to perform on the fire ground. And a lot of guys, they don't want to look in the mirror, right? So it's like we call it basic nozzle mechanics, but there's tons of people that I meet all around the world that I go through basic nozzle mechanics with. And as it turns out, it's not so basic to them. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not so basic to the experienced guys because they've just never been put in a position to where I've asked them to flow water certain ways with their body or do it in certain environments, like either elevated on the stairwell or, pushing down a long hallway, that they've never done it before, that it's not so basic to everyone, and it took me a while I was teaching to figure out that I have to start with a baseline expectation of 0 with everyone I meet, when I teach hot classes, because the ego comes into it and they don't want to admit that they either can't or they haven't, and in their mind, and most people's minds like that, I can't means I won't, so like you got to cross that bridge already. Like Viscuso talks about in his book, Step Up and Lead, there's 3 U's, man. You're either unaware, you're unable, or you're unwilling. So like if I can cross off the unaware and unable, now it's just an emotional conversation. You know what I mean? Like at that point, when I've made you aware of why we're doing what we're doing, and I've given you the tools and equipment and the skill set to perform that skill set, now it's just whether or not you're willing to do it. Right. So we got to cross all those bridges. And some of those things are a little easier to navigate with people, and some of them aren't, but you're absolutely right. Like 90% of that message get lost in a bad delivery of that message, right? Like, so you got to finesse some of these things. And I hate to say that sometimes you got to stroke some ego on some guys just to get them in the room, just to get them on the drill ground, and once you can get them on the drill ground and I can put the mirror up and let them look at themselves in some of these situations, then they'll step back a little bit and be like, all right, man, like, give me some tips on how I can accomplish this while not using so much energy or while I'm not fighting so much nozzle reaction. You know what I mean? Like, because a lot of these things that people will watch a 15-second Instagram clip and be like, man, I'll never do that because I can't, or I've never had to, and that goes back to rescue being the objective, right? Like you've never had to because you see the fire ground through a different lens, right? Like, pushing stairs is probably one of the biggest messages that I've tried to get across to people that I meet the most resistance with. Like super experienced dudes from urban city fire departments. They're like, man, I've never had to do that. I'm like, exactly. You've never had to. You got respiratory protection on, you got a hood on, you got space gloves on, you got 6 layers of protection around your ass cheeks when you're in that stairwell, right? Like if that was your toddler in the hallway, would you want me to wait until I got to the top of the stairs to open the nozzle, or would you want me to start cooling as fast as I could, right? Like I'm sure that you would want me to start launching water around the corner, right? And then it all goes down to the lens of how you see the fire ground, you know. Just because you've never had to doesn't mean it's not better for the unprotected civilian, right? I've never been a fire victim ever, right? So I've always been fully protected and full respiratory protection every time I go into a private dwelling fire. So like the empathy is hard to be there for some people, and then you can get into equipment spec, and like it goes back to I can't, like my nozzle reaction is too high. We're flowing 100 psi nozzles with 200 gallons a minute, like 100 psi or 100 pounds nozzle reaction. I can't do that, so I won't do that, right? So it just leads you down a lot of different rabbit holes with people, and all roads lend back to the pump panel, right? On a lot of that stuff, because if they can't, they won't, you know. But you're absolutely right. The message has to be delivered in a way.
Are some of your Jedi mind tricks for this then? So because we're all so familiar with ourselves and people that we know who have a really good message, like the
Mm-hmm.
content, the context of it is good, but they fail on the actual delivery, right? So the deliverer or the delivery or wherever that problem lies, we call it a soft skill. Are there any other hacks that we have to make sure people are good at this? You talked about how if you reframe this right and you focus and make rescue the objective, and we kind of repurpose this whole discussion about why we're doing this and focus on the why. Is there anything else that we can do when it comes to a lot of the engine company stuff? You can put hands on this and be like, that was more effective, more efficient. What happens when it's this idea about new equipment that you want to get, or you want to change your SOGs or SOPs, something that's a little bit more nebulous? how do you convince people that might need some convincing? Because you're a really
Yeah,
good communicator, and this is where I struggle.
yeah. And that's where I'm at right now with my job at East County. So like
Mm-hmm.
I'm the train chief now. So like I'm in the admin role, but still, and I'm still like, if you look at the flow chart, it's still operations though. So I dig that. But like I tell people all the time, like company level improvement and company level change was easy for me because I had subordinates, right? Like we can have long drawn out conversations at the kitchen table, on the bumper of the engine on the after action review, like we can have long conversations about why we did things, and you can ask me why we're doing certain things. But like the easy thing about being a company officer is that I have subordinates, right? Like we can talk all day long, but you know what you're going to do at the end of that conversation? You're going to do what I told you to do because you work for me, right? Like, and now I'm in the admin role and I don't necessarily have subordinates anymore, right? So as the admin, like my pronouns to those guys are like no, no, right? Like I'm they, those now, so like I'm the guy who says no to things sometimes. So like you got to convince those captains now to operate in a certain way, and it's a different delivery of that message. And I think the biggest thing, and going back to what you were talking about SOGs and SOPs, is that guys have to feel supported by their admin when things get a little Western on the fire ground. Like Mike Lombardo always says, like, are you afraid of the fire? Are you afraid of the fire department? Like that can drive a lot of people's decisions on the fire ground, what they think their admin is going to support them in doing, right? When it gets a little Western, so like take Danny Dwyer, for instance, and for those of you who are listening that don't know the story of Danny Dwyer, like Danny had enough fireground experience and he knew that most likely his decision was going to get him sitting in an office chair across from a bunch of guys in white shirts, but he did what he needed to do at the time, right? And there's a lot of fireground operators that have the experience to know that. Like when the decision comes up, they're like, man, this is going to get me in a room full of admin after I do this, but I'm going to do it because it needs to be done, right? But the young guys that don't have that grit and don't have that fireground experience to know that it needs to be done, even though maybe the admin doesn't really see it that way, but they will get hindered on the fireground based on where your shoulds and shalls are in all of your SOPs and SOGs, right? So like we have to take advantage in the admin role to put those shalls and shoulds in the right spot, right? So that that message gets sent to those guys that if it gets a little Western and it's reasonable what you did, that we're going to back your play. And that frees them up from the handcuffs of the operational decision making sometimes.
Yeah, I mean that
I
was
like
it
that. I
was
always
well.
found it odd. Go ahead,
Right.
JB.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really well put together there, Kyle, and that was a nice explanation of everything we're looking at. Kind of the next thing we had on our docket here. Also, again, to listeners, if you have a question, throw it in. Kyle's here. Um, you kind of coined the phrase, that's an emotional conversation. I'm not here to have an emotional conversation, right?
Yeah.
And Nick and I doing the rescue survey, and having conversations about that. I think that really reflects well with a lot of things that we talk about. Like I know myself and Nick and McWilliams all talk about firefighter line of duty death. And yeah, it's emotional, right? But realistically, how many of those how many of us are dying per year versus civilians, right? The difference is ours is more emotional, right?
Yeah.
To us, right? So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of emotional conversations that people don't want to have. And I say that during my class when I teach to kind of get a laugh out of them and to try to kind of drive the point home as well. Like there's specific points in Cruel Intentions where I use that particular phrase. And it's usually either a fog versus smoothbore thing or a pistol grip, no pistol grip thing, or even when we start talking about NIOSH reports, because I got 2 NIOSH reports that I go through in Cruel Intentions, but you got to lay the groundwork for people to not put that wall up immediately, right? And sometimes you got to let them know that like this is not, I'm not here to devolve this conversation into an emotional one, right? Because nobody wins an emotional argument. We just all roll around in the mud together and we all get dirty like a bunch of pigs, right? So like once the argument or the debate turns emotional, then personal shots come out and like feelings start to get hurt, and it's just tough for people to just look at the facts of the situation, right? And more people need to have that mindset, I think, especially when you're trying to cause change, either whether it's fireground operations or equipment spec or, protocol changes. Like once you let it get and devolve to an emotional conversation, like there's no moving the needle anymore, right? So like we just have to stay, we just got to be a bunch of adults and be able to have a conversation without it devolving in that aspect, in my opinion, at least. And I think we would be able to move the needle a little farther when we do that.
Yeah, good points, Kyle. Sorry, I was texting J-Lo. We might have some problems with some people not being able to comment. I don't know if you saw that. Disregard, he's an idiot and he just found the chat. Sorry, J-Lo. All right. I really love that idea too. And that's so hard to do. Do you find that hard at times when things start to get emotional to recognize, hey, this is getting emotional. Let's take a break and let's stop this conversation. Because once we get amped up, like I'm not hearing you, you're not hearing me. Like there's like a distinct relationship with the more stressed I am, the less I'm hearing out of anyone else's mouth. So I just talk louder and around that. Have you ever had problems where like you find yourself getting emotional too? Or do you have any tips or Jedi mind tricks to like recognize like, all right, I'm getting amped up, disengage, let's restart this, reframe this whole conversation. How do you get around those difficulties?
When I was younger, I had a lot of that. I was immature, and I used to get to that point. And really, honestly, until I became real educated to a point to where I could make an argument that was pretty hard to combat, that's a lot of it. I think a lot of those emotional conversations come from lack of factual basis behind your argument. You know what I mean? And a lot of guys, they end up devolving because they don't have anything else to pull from. And I was that way when I was uneducated as well. It's like you get to a certain point, and now it's just, I'm grabbing at straws, trying not to drown in this argument or debate we're having right now, but I've become a pretty good wordsmith, especially with the topics that I discuss. And I've been able to find a way to present the information where it's hard to argue, and I've been able to avoid having emotional conversations with people because the factual information is like a avalanche. You know what I mean? Like once you get hit with the avalanche, it's hard to even draw straws against it. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to find different counterpoints to a lot of what we talk about in my range, at least. And I think that's the best bet that people could have to avoid those emotional conversations is do your research and have enough ammo in your arsenal to where they don't have the opportunity to devolve it. Like now, you speaking against the point I'm trying to making is counterproductive for the end result that we're all looking for, right? Like, and like I'll ask every class every lecture that I have, one of the first things that we talk about is like the most important question that every fire department has to answer in the world is, are we going to anticipate that private dwelling fires are occupied until we say they're not? Like, and if you can hook them with that, like now we can go down some real rabbit holes and then we can always return them back to that, right? Like if we can all agree that the building's occupied until we put hands and eyes in the building to determine it's not, now every decision that we make on the fire ground stems from lesson number one, right? Like, and now everything that we talk about, if we can make it in a way, deliver it in a way to where the end result will be better for the unprotected civilian, the end result will be better for the environment, better for the unprotected, occupants in here. And we've already agreed they're here until we say they're not. Like now it's hard to get emotional with that, right? Like it's hard to argue with that. Now it's no longer a choice in a lot of what we do, right? Like vertical ventilation, horizontal ventilation, that you can find counterpoints to all that until you put yourself in the shoes of the guy in his pajamas. Now things are a little bit different, right?
How about when you're talking to your wife and your beautiful wife, you guys got a great marriage, but I'm sure at times you don't see everything eye to eye. Do you ever find
Yeah.
yourself getting emotional? And then what happens when you do get emotional? When you're talking with your wife, your kid, whoever, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else at work about whatever topic. This one seems like it's right in your wheelhouse and you're going to knock it out every time. Now we're
Yeah.
talking about maybe something that you aren't as knowledgeable on, or the person that you're talking about sees this completely differently than you, and you don't even agree upon some basic starting points.
Yeah.
You ever have
I,
problems with those conversations?
I used to, I used to not have a filter And especially with my wife, I used to not have a filter, and I would just, it was like verbal diarrhea, like it. But now I think long game, right? Like sometimes, even like if we're having a conversation about something and like we're discussing something, and she says something that's incorrect. Let's just say that, like, and I know it's incorrect. Like long game would be, I could say, you're incorrect and it's this right now, or you know, I could swallow that and then she could find out later on her own. And then she usually comes back and says, "Hey, yeah, I was wrong about that." And I'm like, "Yeah, you were." But I chose not to highlight that particular point at that time, and I'm glad that we're talking about it now, but sometimes it's easier just to swallow that, with the different line of topic, you know what I mean? Like, and it's easier to do that when the consequences aren't so high, right? Like, so like, when we were talking earlier about fireground operations, like the consequences are super high with that, but like in this conversation, the consequence is not necessarily that high, so it's easier to swallow that and think long game. Happy
That's
wife,
wisdom
happy
right
life,
there.
right? Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
Jedi level thinking.
Yeah.
we got a question in the chat for you, Kyle.
Okay, bring it on.
From Kim Campbell. Can
Okay.
he talk about the pros and cons of putting water on in a non-fire room that has dark smoke, painting it black, in quotes? I know a lieutenant who says we shouldn't do that, and it will ruin any visibility.
The visibility that's in the black dark smoke already. Yeah, I would say. Okay. Visibility doesn't necessarily relate to survivability, so we'll cross that one off the list right there. There's a lot of data that will support that. Another good one, and this all ties together. It's a great question, man. Like another good one that you could talk to him about is if he is a paramedic, or if he is not a paramedic, tell him to research the human airway. So at 125 degrees Fahrenheit or so, the human airway starts to have some scarring happen in the trachea. And around 200 degrees and above inside the alveolar space, you got no gas exchange going on, right? So the goal should be to, like, gold standard would be below 125 everywhere in the building, right? So there's only one tool on the fire ground that could do that. And we brought it with us, like, don't be stingy with the solution, right? So like the ultimate goal would be below 125. And obviously as the nozzleman, unless you got one of those like stupid Scott sight things in your mask or something, like you can't see the thermal imaging camera, right? So you just have to assume that it's over 125 in an environment like that. So like going over the life safety aspect of it for unprotected civilians, that's an easy choice, right? So like we're trying to keep it below 125, and a consistent water flow will do that. And it's conditions driven, like it's all conditions driven. So on that aspect, that's an easy one to solve if we all agree that, we're here for the unprotected civilian, right? Like, so you got to ask him that first, and then fish hook him with that one. And now we can go down the rabbit hole of the unprotected airway, right? We can go down the rabbit hole of the 200-degree mark. From a fire behavior perspective on that same aspect is that in 2025, like it's not news that black turbulent smoke is going to be bright orange flame with the right oxygen content, right? So that's not news to anybody in the fire service. A buddy of mine once told me it's way easier to keep the genie in the bottle than it is to let the genie pop out of the bottle and try to stuff him back in. So like we should be using our fire streams in a way to prevent rapid fire growth. So we all know what that condition could do. It could lean out to a point to where it has rollover, which will lead to rapid fire development, which will lead to flashover, right? And that's not healthy for anyone, even protected firefighters inside. So yeah, I mean that's the two routes that I would go to attack that particular argument with that particular person. But it all comes down to your ability to deliver that message in a way to where it doesn't devolve.
That was like a master class on how to communicate something
Hmm.
relatively high level and maybe divisive within the fire service to a
Yeah.
way that everybody comes out on the other end going, yeah, he's got a really good point. I got no rebuttals
Yeah.
for that are logical. It was unemotional. I
Yeah.
have heard something in the comments that you cannot have an unemotional conversation about the metro load. Have a rebuttal for that one,
That
good
dude's
sir.
probably from Oklahoma. Yeah. Metro load is just a cleaner version of the Cleveland, So like they get away with that because they run combat ready, like I don't know how it pops for them. So like most Cleveland loads, you got to have a high pressure nozzle for it to pop and not kink on you. But those dudes swear by it, man. You probably talked to J-Lo about that one.
That might have been J Lo in the
He's
comments. I'm
Yeah.
not
he's the
quite sure.
comment. Yeah.
Dude. I was supposed to do a head to head. I think it was a dude named Zach that worked for Oklahoma City. We were going to do head to head with the flat load. And it just never came to fruition. We had talked about it forever. It was going to be like a Red River type thing.
The Red River rivalry. I like that. This is gonna be
Yeah.
better than Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. I'll pay for that. Netflix, if you're listening,
Yeah.
let's watch this.
Yeah. It'd be tough though, man, because like I can design stretches that would burn that thing down. And they could design stretches that would burn me down. You know what I mean? But it just depends on how deep you want to look into the conversation, right? Like if it's just about stretching dry hose, that's not hard to do. Like we can all set up, like if I ran the triple load, I could set up a stretch where the triple load would burn anything else down, right? Like we could set that up. But if it goes deeper than that, like let's talk about how it pops and let's talk about how it kinks every time it throws a loop, in most situations. But I'd have to do some testing with their equipment.
Yeah, I
But
have
yeah.
some unemotional thoughts on the Metro load or the Cleveland load. I don't know about the Metro load, but J Lo, I'll call you after the show.
Yeah, it
You
sends
do
the wrong
something that
message to people.
you do something that I thought was really, really interesting. You kind of, in my phrase, you kind of teach backwards a little bit.
Mhm.
And what I'm referring to right now is like when you teach like a push, you start in the fire room. And then if I remember correctly, you'll do the fire room, and then you'll start moving backwards a little bit, or excuse me, you'll go like 5 feet back from the fire room, and then the last 5 feet while you're pushing into the fire room. Then you'll go back 10 feet and go back into the fire room. Then you go back 10 feet, a left hand turn, another 15 feet. And I think I've always done it in reverse,
Yeah.
or forward. And how you did it and how you do it made so much sense to me. Where did that come from? And what are the pros of that as you see it? And where else could I use this trick?
Well, it's just like the way people learn psychomotor skill set. A lot of it has to do with that. You give them a softball, let them crush it, and then start increasing the difficulty, right? But like in that same aspect, like to get buy-in from folks that don't do these skill sets already, specifically the one that I teach, you got to give them a softball because the I can't means I won't, right? So like if I give you a softball and you push 5 feet and make a turn, and a lot of people they don't know how to make a turn with an open nozzle, right? Like they don't know how to stay upright because like in the hallway it's super simple, right? Like, because in a hallway, it's like bowling with the rails up. I can just like bumble around and it'll keep me upright, right? Like, but if I put you in a warehouse in a 60 by 60 open area and I tell you to just turn to your non-dominant side with an open nozzle, chances are you're gonna take a bit of a reaction to those physics, right? So like teaching them how to turn like a forklift, essentially, like turning like a forklift with that open nozzle, with that ass end swinging around with the base, that's easier to do in a short area. So like there's a lot of basic fundamentals that have to go into that particular push that they're going to need once I push them 50 feet back and put 3 turns in it, right? Like, and if I don't cover that ground first, they're not going to be as successful as they would be had we started small and then started increasing the difficulty, right? Like giving them small wins. And a lot of that has to do with the time frame that a lot of these conferences and a lot of these hot classes have. Like if I could choose one thing to teach you in 2 hours, it would be fire room operations and the last turn into the fire room. Because if you can push 5 feet in a turn left and a 5 feet in a turn right, however you are, left-handed or right-handed, if you can push the non-dominant side and make a turn, and I teach you how to react in the fire room, like Bonifield talks about Uncle's Fin, right? Like make the fire say uncle, search the fire room, ventilate the fire room, check for extension, then notify command. Like if I can just cover that in 2 hours, you can expand upon that on your own, right? Like we've already crossed the Rubicon with a lot of stuff that's going to make you more successful with the nozzle on. And then if we have 4 hours, we can cover fire room ops, the landing strip with the turn offset on your dominant and non-dominant side. And then I can increase the difficulty by pushing you back a little bit. Like now we can talk about distant cooling. We can talk about how to get water in the room that's offset when you're 20 feet from it and it's this big, right? Like now all that mindset has to increase a little bit. Like your IQ has to get a little bit better if you want to be as successful as you could be, right? And that delivery of that message, going back to what we talked about earlier, it comes down to how you deliver that message, and not if you don't do this, you're doing it wrong. But if you do this, you have the potential to make things better for everyone inside, even the unprotected civilian, right? So like being able to solve that problem in chunks. I've always found it easier to chunk out the material because you're going to get all levels of experience and skill set in these classes, right? Like, so you got the probie and then you've got the 20-year guy in the same class. And if I push the 20-year guy to a point to where I'm going to put him on the spot in front of 10 people watching him and say, hey, man, you got 20 years. I want you to push 3 turns and make the fire room, without falling over or losing the nozzle. Like that puts him in a position to look in the mirror, right? Like, and he may not want to do that at that point. But if I treat them all the same, and I was like, no matter how much, experience you have, we're going to push 5 feet and make a left turn and 5 feet and a right turn, and we're all going to grow together, right? And at that point, it gets buy-in from everybody in the class at that point. And we can all grow together, and we all go through trials and tribulations together. And at that point, when we're doing those easy skill sets, it's not exposing the lack of skill set as easy as it would be with a 50-foot push, right? So like at Oath Keepers every year, the station that I've taught at Oath Keepers since we've been at the new spot is a full push about 115 feet. It involves a straight run stairwell push right-handed into a 180, into a second 180, and then dumps you into a tight hallway prop to the fire room. Like super unrealistic push for most people, right? Like it's 115 feet with the nozzle on, but like Gilpin says at the end of it, like we asked you to do that so you can leave here knowing that you can, right? Like if you can do that, you can push 10 feet, but we don't start you at 115 feet, right? Like that whole push is chunked out throughout the entire day, right? Like there's a station that just covers the hallway prop that is 10 feet and a turn into the fire room. And then my station covers the stairwell push, right? And then there's stations outside that cover left and right turns like 180s and hose management, right? Like, so we chunk it all out all day with the crescendo of you pushing 115 feet in zero visibility, right? So like you just gain more confidence after confidence after confidence, and then you just crush it at the end. And it's an ass kicker.
I thought it was so wise. And as soon as I took your class, I immediately went and copied exactly what you were teaching and started doing that in our department. So I'm
Good.
our captain of suppression or engine company opposite our department. But we were doing it reverse. We were starting outside the fire building and going in 15 feet. Then we were going in 15 feet and taking a left. And we just barely made it to the fire room after like the first couple hours. I love it. Seems so dumb, but it was I thought there was so much value in just starting at the fire room and working your way back. Chunk from the end result as opposed to from the beginning. I thought that made a lot of sense to me. Jeff, you want to ask this next question from Intersection of Leadership?
Yeah, so real quick, I gotta hit our friend up real quick. One of the best from Michigan, you know him, Kyle. Sean Hughes. Real quick one. He just wants to know who the greatest axe thrower you've ever faced is.
No, it's Sean Hughes.
Yeah.
Sean Hughes is the gold medal winner, multiple time champion.
Yeah, just a
I'll
little,
always be number 2.
just a little humble brag. He just wanted you to admit it, I think. So,
Yeah.
He's
um,
the axe throwing champion.
all right, so this is from Intersection of Leadership. He says, can we talk about a transitional attack line with the argument that if you put water on it, everything gets better? I feel like that's not the case. We have to occupy the space. What is the counter argument?
Okay. The first thing that I would recommend you do is stop calling it transitional. Like the T word makes people's blood pressure go up, dude. Like you gotta describe it a little differently if you want to cross the Rubicon with some people. But on that topic, like we use exterior water as a aid to get interior in East Montgomery County. Like we run 3-man engines. We got 13 dudes on our fire ground. Like, so we use high volumes of water in a short time frame as a time machine, right? So like we're trying to reduce the fire load to a point to where we can instantaneously begin to reduce the zero impact time, right? Like that's the whole goal, is to be able to start positively influencing the situation, whatever it may be, in the shortest amount of time possible, right? Because the only thing you can do with less is less. So what I've tried to do when I explain this to people is to, number one, tell them to get it into their mind that exterior water should be used in a way to get you interior and not in a way to delay your movement in interior, right? Like it should make your movement on the inside easier and faster for a short-staffed engine company, if that's the choice that you make, but there's situations that are going to require exterior water to be plan A. One of them would be a wind-driven fire, hoarding conditions, forcible entry concerns. Like you could put all those things into one category, which would be reflex time, right? Like if the reflex time is going to be longer for me to get interior where I want to be and need to be, then somebody put water on the fire. Like put water on the fire and make it count. And especially if you're doing it on tank water, you got to have some conversations with dudes. Number one, on where fuel is in the building, whether it's solid fuel and whether it's gas fuel, and then be able to have that conversation on how to recognize what positive return on investment looks like. Like if you're counting on guys from the academy to know, where solid fuel is and bright orange flame is produced from solid fuel, and then black turbulent smoke is gas fuel, right? Like you're kidding yourself if you think that they're coming out of the fire academy with that knowledge, right? Like it's going to take them screwing up on the fire ground and causing some wheels to start turning in their head from their personal experiences, right? So like my recommendation to the dude first would be stop calling it transitional and just explain to people that the point of that water should be used in almost all aspects to aid you to get onto the interior, right? And I think that message, going back to your message thing, that message was delivered very poorly when it came out from the UL study. Like the UL study said what it said, but the delivery of that message was they allowed other people to deliver that message instead of those who made that study. You know what I mean? Like I wish that Keith Stakes would have been out there talking about the exterior study at the same time that they were talking about the interior study, because there's only half of it, right? So like when the exterior study came out, the delivery of that message was so clouded and it was so watered down, that it gets a bad taste in people's mouths, and that it sends the wrong message, in my opinion, about exterior water. Like there's times where exterior water is beneficial, right? And we got to have that conversation with people, because if we're going to be good at all aspects of fire attack, we also have to be good at applying water from the exterior as well, right? But we need to know that rescue is the objective, and the mission is to get us inside as fast as possible. And if that water coming from the exterior at the same time where a line is being stretched to the interior, if I can accomplish both those things, why wouldn't I, right? But you just got to make sure everybody's on the same page with that. Now, I don't even know if I answered this question.
No, that was really good, actually. I think James Nisbet, who is probably a friend of all of ours, great guy. After saying he was going to expose himself, missed that, James. You're not supposed to do that online anymore, I don't think. But he said everything gets better for a brief period of time. Regrowth can happen in as little as 15 seconds. Putting your eggs in the basket that you will put the fire out through the window is not realistic. So another really good point for this person as well. Kyle, something that you mentioned in your answer. Can you just define what zero impact time is?
Sure. That was a term I heard from Scott Thompson. So Scott Thompson is the first guy I heard that from. So zero impact time, the way he described it to me, was the time frame from when you arrive on location, the air brake hits, until you have positive change on the environment, whether that's a high angle rescue or a medical call or a motor vehicle accident with entrapment or a house fire or a high rise fire. Like the zero impact time should be reduced to the smallest amount of time as possible. That should be the goal. It'll never be zero, because we got to step out of the rig, we got to stretch, like depending on the situation, you got to throw tools if it's on an extrication. Like it'll never be zero, but we want to try to ensure that our preparation level has allowed us to reduce that zero impact time down to the lowest amount that we can achieve, so like it'll never be zero, because we still have to do things on the fire ground before we can start operating, right? But there are things we can do in the preparation phase of our training in our operational playbook that we can start cutting time off of that, right? And that comes down to just piecing it out. Like Ben Schultz has a fantastic class about that, right? Like every second counts, I think is the name of his class. Like, and he breaks down the mindset of isolating skill sets to where you can save time in every part and piece of that. And it ends up saving you minutes, right? Like if I can take 5 seconds off this part and 5 seconds off that part and 10 seconds off this part, we're looking at 60 seconds pretty quick, right? Now all that is heading in the direction of just narrowing that zero impact time as low as possible. But that should be the focus of everything. Like a lot of guys, they get in the habit of drilling all the time instead of training to lead to a drill, right? So like to me, the difference between training and drilling is context. And usually the level of personal protective equipment we're wearing while we're doing it. Like training is a repetitive process that I can do with limited amounts of PPE, that I can drill on that particular skill set over and over and over again, and to a point to where at some level, at some point in that traveling distance from not having the skill set to employing it on the fireground, you have to transfer that repeatable skill set to a context-driven drill, right? So like take stairwell pushes, for instance. We can push stairs in bunker pants and leather gloves and a t-shirt hundreds of hours. But at some point, if you want them to be able to successfully do that on the fireground, number one, you got to teach them what it's going to look like bring context in the situation. And that's what I always tell guys, like at some point you need to take this skill set and then put context with it with a drill. And the easiest way to do that would be to find a YouTube video or a helmet cam with neutral plane on a stairwell where it would call for this particular skill set, screenshot it, print it out, and put it on the side of the burn building, right? Like when now we're going full protective equipment into this structure and they're looking at this picture, now it's no longer, I can do this skill set. Now it's if this, then this, right? Like, and this is the situation that it would look like when I would perform this skill set. Like at some point that context has to be there, and that will start to reduce the time frame, which will lead you to reducing the zero impact time, right? Like that's the whole goal with all of this, like how fast you mask up, how fast you put your gear on, how fast you stretch, whether you call for water inside or outside, what kind of buildings you have, like if I'm traveling up the interior stairwell of a 5-story apartment building every time I fight fire, I'm probably not going to mask up on the exterior, and I'm probably not going to charge at the front door of that building, right? Like it's all context driven. So I'm going to have to take time off of other parts of that process to get that zero impact time down, right? And going to the exterior water thing that we were just talking about, like the Chicago quick hit, right? That's them reducing zero impact time. Like when they pull up on a 10-story building and he dumps the deck gun in the 10-story window while they're stretching up the stairwell, that's reducing zero impact time, right? So it's not always interior and it's always exterior water. Like it's if this, then this, right? Like, so we got to start looking at the fire ground a little differently and don't let the ego get into it. And like what's best for the particular situation to reduce the zero impact time to keep rescue being the objective, right? So there's a lot of ego that goes into a lot of this stuff sometimes. And that T word usually brings it out of people, man. You gotta stop calling it the T word, bro.
Yeah, man. So here's one that I kind of just thought of here. So when it comes to being a student and also teaching at conferences, you've probably been to more than most, and a lot of conferences multiple times. So if you're a younger firefighter, or even if you're on the fire department in any rank, what's kind of your advice for taking what you learn and bringing back without getting eaten alive? Like we get to teach together, and if somebody's search culture in their department sucks and they take, our VES class, right? And they go back and like, oh, we suck and we're all just a bunch of pansies because we don't go, beyond the door. That's not going to be received well, obviously, if that's how they phrase it, right? But they come back jazzed up. What's the best way you think for them to relay that information?
Well, I think there's two questions there. And I like the way you phrased it. So like we all have to be students of the game, and we got to continue being students of the game, especially instructors, right? So like the coolest thing that I've found about being an instructor that was a student of the game is I get different tips and tricks from other instructors to be able to deliver the message in a different way, like you're talking about, right? So like it's all Jedi mind tricks, man. So like I went through this at my fire department with that particular skill set that you're talking about right now. Like traditionally we would perform VES from a ladder and the captain would stay on the ladder, and we would pop in and out, right? Like pop in, isolate, search that room, pop out on the ladder, move the ladder, and then go into the next window and the next window, right? So like one of the things I tried to change, or successfully, I think, changed when I got in the training division was those benchmarks that we talked about. So like instead of just giving a guy a skill set and saying, go perform VES and don't die doing it, instead of that, I can break down the actual benchmarks of that and kind of force them to start thinking a little differently, right? But when you do that, you can't just lay the paper on the desk and be like, all right, dog, deal with it. This is how you're doing VES now. Like you got to go down that rabbit hole, right? And go on to explain what you're talking about. Like, and it's isolated to this particular topic, but it can be used in any topic. Is like you got to get them to agree without agreeing, knowing that they're agreeing. Like you got to get them to a point to where like you got to ask them some questions that you know the answers to, like you're the lawyer, right? Like your rhetorical questions. So like if I dump a probie into a room and I stay on the ladder as the captain, and I tell him that your job is not only to VES this room, but I want you to complete a Division II search. Like the primary of Division II is the finish line, not the room. And then he gets to that point, he's like, okay. And then you ask that same captain, all right, man, you got potential fire conditions in that hallway. Who do you want making the decision whether or not you can move past the room? Like, who do you want to crack that door open and look down that hallway and see if we can make the room across the hallway or not? And he's like, well, I want to make that decision. It's like, awesome, Cap. Where best can you make that decision, right? That you can't make that decision on the ladder, Jack. Like, you got to make that decision in the hallway. So I need you to dump into the window and make that decision, right? Like just slow, easy wins there. So going back to your question is I would, and what we can gain from other instructors is the way they explain the skill set we can take home with us. And it's not just about the skill set in general, but how it was delivered, right? And then we can learn from each other on how we deliver these skill sets. And then we can start chipping away at some of those problems in our own culture of our fire department that way.
It's a beautiful answer there. James Nisbet has another one that I think is really well worded. And I'm going to direct quote here. Can we talk about the importance of stream placement versus gallons per minute? The deck count comments on the internet give me a tumor.
Yeah. Yeah. Placement trumps volume almost every single time, man. And, you know, and you can get into the data from the fire tax study and it tells you all of that as well. You know, like, but going back to what you were talking about putting guys in front of the fire room, right? So like I have conversations with dudes about the fire room itself being a fuel controlled fire. And it goes back to where the fuel is in general. So like in a fuel controlled fire, the fuel is usually going to be 5 foot and below in the room, right? So like if I put you with your level of experience in front of a 10 by 10 bedroom with an open nozzle flowing 150 gallons a minute, like how long would that take for you to get a hold of that room? The most common answer I get is 30 seconds, which kind of blows my mind, but like it'll be 5 to 10 seconds if you put water in the right spot, like garage fires. Like take the garage fire. Most common way that we fight garage fires for a lot of people is a high volume at a low elevation, right? And it's like a light switch. Like garage fires go out super simple because it's all heavily exposed to you, right? They're very visually stimulating the overhead, but all the fuel levels down where you can see it burning, right? And it's the same thing in a fire room. Like the fire room is the garage fire. It's just at the end of the hallway, right? Like it's a fuel controlled fire at the end of the hallway. And if you can get guys to recognize where fuel is and how extinguishment is achieved, then it doesn't take a whole lot of water. Like you'd be surprised what you can do with 85 gallons a minute. You put it in the right spot, right? So like you can look at the fire tax study, and one of the graphs I show in Cruel Intentions is the fire tax study. The highest volume of water they used in the fire tax study in the UL study that Keith did was 191 gallons. So like if we break that down even further and just nerd out on it for a second, that was 2 rooms and a hallway with extension into the living room. So like let's take the 10 by 10 bedroom itself. And if I'm flowing 150 gallons a minute, that's 2.5 gallons a second. So like if I flow that nozzle flowing 150 gallons a minute for 10 seconds, that's 25 gallons. So like let's just say 25 gallons a box, right? So like if we got 2 boxes 2 fire rooms that leads to a hallway. Let's say the hallway's 3 boxes because it's 25 feet, usually 6 feet, by 25 or, 10 by 25 or whatever your hallways are. Let's just say it's 3 boxes. And then the living room itself. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's say the living room's 3 boxes. So that's 8 boxes. So that's 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175, 200. Like, if we look at it like that, like 191 gallons, that's pretty close to 200, right? So, like, if you can break it down and nerd out a little bit on the information, like you could track it all the way back from the fire room all the way to the front door. But you got to be a surgeon with that water to use that little amount of water to do that, right? And in order to make guys a surgeon with that water, you got to have some conversations with them, right? They got conversations about where fuel is, the positive return on investment idea that we talked about earlier. Like, how do you tell whether you're having positive return on investment, and get guys to a point to where they're not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? Like, that's the definition of insanity. So, like, you watch YouTube videos all the time where they're flowing water and they're not having good positive return on investment, but yet they keep doing it because either they can't recognize it, or the stimulation around them has got their blood pressure through the roof and their stress level, and they're just not picking up. Their IQ's not there, and there's no adults in the room, right? Like, to tap them on the shoulder and be like, "Hey, man, you're not having good. Like, let's do something different, right?" But going back to James's question, there's really 3 reasons why we're flowing water and we're not having good return on investment. It's because it's wind driven. You didn't bring enough, like BTUs are outweighing your GPMs, or you're not putting it in the right spot. So, like, 99.999% of the time, it's placement issue. You're not putting it in the right spot. Like, you'd be surprised what you can do with 85 gallons a minute when you put it in the right spot, right? So hopefully that answers James's question. I know he hears me. We like speak on a level together. Sorry for all the truck guys in the audience today.
Telepathic, Sean Hughes got one.
Oh, this could be a good one.
Outside of hose or flowing, if you were able to hit the reset button, what's the number one thing you wish you knew then versus now?
Like younger Kyle? Is that what he means?
I
Like,
think so. I think that's
if
what
I
he
could
means.
turn back time. The way to deliver a message, like any message, dude. Like, I was really poor at being able to talk to people for a long time. So I wish I could turn back time. I think I'd have more friends right now if I could go back and be able to have conversations with people, and be educated enough and adult enough to have those conversations, right? I wish that I could go back in time and change some of the manuals. That would be cool. Like influence NFPA 1001. If I could go back in a DeLorean, that'd be cool.
All right, we got another one. So it's kind of the inverse of Nisbet's question. Where would you draw the line at low GPM? He still knows guys taking a booster line as the primary attack line.
Oof. I would draw it at like 100, 125. Like, if you know what you're doing with water, 100 gallons a minute, you can get away with a lot with that. But it all depends on where you're putting it. So, like, if you're putting 100 gallons a minute through an exhaust point, you're going to get swallowed up. Like, radiant heat's going to keep you from being able to put water in the right spot, right? So, like, close quarters combat in a box, I would draw the line at 100 to 125 gallons a minute, right? I wouldn't want to go any lower than that for the average dude. And that's why the national average from NFPA is 150, right? So, like, we could do it with 85, but it takes a surgeon. Like, there's no oh shit water with 85 gallons a minute. That's why they give you 150. It's a sledgehammer, right? So that's the whole point behind the 150 is it's a sledgehammer. But interesting story. Like, I'm on the UL panel, the Rohome study with our brother Murtaugh and Clyde Gordon, a bunch of other guys. I want to find out, like, where's the dividing line for certain BTU production. I mean, we can do the math. You have a fantastic article, Nick, that talks about joules and,
that's a deep cut right there.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's one of my favorites, dude. It was apples and oranges, right? It was the name of it.
Yeah, apples to apples. Yeah,
apples to apples. Yeah,
yeah.
It's a fantastic article. Homework assignment for anybody in the audience. But, like, I want to find the dividing line. My personal dividing line would be 100 to 125 gallons a minute.
You mentioned something earlier that got me thinking. Do you think that maybe the NFFF needs to be updated, the National Fire Flow Formula, or any other fire formulas? Do you think those are accurate? Do you think they stand the test of time? Do you think they're going to end up being higher, lower, the same? Do you think if we relooked, if we scientifically kind of evaluated this now, where would we end
Yeah.
up, you think?
I think a lot of that has to do with the perfect environment. Like those
Yeah,
formulas being the perfect environment, like you're putting water in the exact right spot, which we all
that's a
know
good
is
point.
not possible for most people. And I think it should be a little updated. Like Brush taught me a long time ago to not use the NFA fire flow formula as it's written, like flip it upside down, right? Like GPM times 3 instead of square
Mhm.
footage divided by 3. So like that's an easier one for most people. Brush taught me that in like 2013 or something. But Brush is super ahead of his time. Like almost everything that dude's ever taught me. Like later on down the road, I was like, man, Brush was right. Like he's always right. But I'm never at a point like when I met Brush for the first time, I was super immature to a point to where like I wasn't diving deep enough to understand what he was saying to me. Like first time I ever met him, I heard him lecture and he was saying that we should be calling ourselves heat fighters instead of firefighters. And I was like, this dude lost his mind. Like, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And then you dive deep enough, and then going down from what we've been talking about this entire program, like we should be heat fighters, right? Like it's little stuff like that. But yes,
Yep.
I think it could use an update. But is that update going to be counterproductive? I don't know. Because like if we really look at the science of it, that if we put water in the right spot, there's going to be a lot of people that maybe start championing us going back to 1.5 inches, right? And if we go back to 1.5 inches, is that counterproductive for the engine company cultures in America, right? Like, because I think we could. I mean, I tested it. We can't get more than 125 out of 1.5 inches, the 1.5 inches that we have now, without a whole lot of interesting additives to the hose line, But is that dividing line 125 or not? And if that ends up being the dividing line, like, do we really need 1 3/4? Like, I think that could be counterproductive once we
That's
start
a
going.
fair point. Like finding the truth might lead to something that in the actual friction full environment that we operate in, where you have all this friction and you're throwing in decision makings and we're not thinking as clearly as we should, and we can't do certain things because of hoarding conditions or whatever, all the realism that gets mixed up in there.
Yeah.
Like, sure, this would work perfectly if I had 125 gallons per minute. So
Yeah.
the truth is still there, and it's still something we can touch and tangible, but the actual reality that we have to deal with, and they don't quite align.
Yeah. And if the fire service was full of special operators, we could probably do that. But
Yeah.
we all know that's not the case.
You were mentioning something earlier here too. Sorry to step on your toes, JB. Difference between skill and drill is context here, or training and drilling. How do you teach decision making? How do you teach friction? How do you teach realism in your classes? Where does that get brought in? And is that something that's there from the first evolution that you teach, or is that something that you guys work towards?
Man, I would say 95% of the classes that I teach, we don't have time for friction. Like there's some conferences that I'm a part of, like Oath Keepers, we do friction, but we do it at a rate after all the skill sets been discussed all day, right? And it's designed that way. Like Gilpin designed that conference that way. Brothers in Battle, there's a lot of friction that goes into the classes that we teach for Brothers in Battle, but the skill set has already been delivered, right? Like we don't just throw the wrench at you at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? Like it's usually at the point where most people are exhausted mentally and physically, and then the friction starts setting in. And it's more so like the mirror, right? So like the mirror gets at that point because that's where we want you to learn that you were overwhelmed. Like we want you to fail during training at some aspect. Like that's the goal, is to push you to exhaustion. In some classes, like at Oath Keepers, that's one of the ultimate goals of that day, is to push you to a level of exhaustion that you may not have achieved on your own. And then like be able to show you the mirror when you get to that point. And like the whole day is designed, because like we got at Oath Keepers, it's a full day of engine company operations and a full day of truck company operations. So it's two, you get one and then the other. But like it was designed in a way to expose weakness without us having to expose weakness, right? Like at the end of the day, I don't have to tell you what you need to work on. Like that's the whole goal, is to do it in a positive environment to where there's no browbeating, and get to a point to where the friction has overwhelmed you, and maybe not mentally, but physically. Like you just can't function in this atmosphere because you've been pushed to that level of exhaustion, either mental or physical, right? And it's tough to consistently and slowly let that friction build. A lot of people do it wrong by trying to do too much at once, right? Like it's a slow boil. You gotta, it's like the frog in the pot, right? So like you gotta, it's a mental game on being able to build that friction from a low rate to a high rate. Some guys do it well, some guys don't. But I don't have enough time with the majority of the people that I teach to bring friction into the equation. Like they have to do that after the fact with what I'm doing with them. But it's important. It needs to go that way.
Yeah, and even when we do bring friction into it, Kyle, they have to understand, like in the classes we do, we're there till 9 o'clock at night, so you get the friction. I
Yeah.
mean, we typically don't even bring friction or stress or anything like that into it until like 3 o'clock. That's usually when the grab lab and those guys are done. But
Half day.
yeah, half day. So Peter VDB says, I'd love to hear more on if this, then this decision making scenarios on either VES, beyond the door, or when making a push.
Well, I think I'm not the best guy to talk about VES scenarios. There's other guys that I would recommend for that, Jeff being one of them, Nick being one of them. But I could talk about the push, right?
Yeah.
So like decision making on the if this, then this has to do with conditions, right? So like conditions should drive tactics in the majority of most situations, right? So like you got to have some conversations about fire behavior and what type of fire behavior is dangerous now without intervention, and what type of fire behavior is dangerous in a little while without intervention, right? And then once we have established that baseline where we're all speaking the same language, now we can start having some conversations about conditions in the building and why we would make decisions based on what we're presented with, right? Because you don't want to overwhelm guys with too much information to try to analyze, because then they'll get paralysis by analysis, right? So like it's got to be short, easy decisions to make. If I see this, I'm going to do this, right? If I'm going to see this, I'm going to do that. And you can teach them a lot about that with fireground experience, number one, or you can use a lot of video clips to teach that, like to at least build the Rolodex up to where they can start recognizing it on the fireground. Because if you wait to experience all these things on your fireground, your actual fireground, like you'll never get to that point. You're like, unless you're working in Baltimore or you're working in Chicago or working in New York, like you don't go to enough work to see everything that we could talk about with video clips that we can find, right? And there's plus or minuses to that because there's no friction on the computer while we're sitting there watching videos, right? But we can do a lot of that associative learning by watching fires burn, and like that has been said many times by many people, is bag it, like start predicting fire behavior and where it's going to go and how long it's going to take to get there in some situations, right? And then we can start talking about interventions. So like circling back, if you've got a good education point to where we're all speaking the same language on fire behavior, that building condition inside will lead you down the road of usually a fork, like it's like a flow chart, right? Like if I see this, I can either flow water or not flow water, right? And then each one of those has advantages and disadvantages. So, and it's all conditions driven. But the easiest way I could explain it is that if I can see my feet while standing up straight, we're going to walk. If I'm in tripod and I can see below the smoke, chances are I can move a lot more quickly and I'm not really in danger of having rapid fire development in that arena. And if I'm in tripod and I can't see, we're flowing water. Like that's pretty much the baseline, step one, step two, step three, right? So hopefully that answers your question, Peter.
Got another question from the Reverend Gary Lane.
Uh-oh.
He said, thoughts on half bailing a solid bore as the poor man's hen blade when stream reach may not be as critical with low end GPM, still in the 115 to 135 plus range. Room to room, off balance, he said.
Yeah, I think it's a win. Like water being flowed at that rate is a win if you can put it in the right spot. And I think you're more likely to put it in the right spot if you've got large droplets in a larger pattern, in that half bale. And there's a lot of guys that, man, that we could go a couple different ways on this one, but like, I think air entrainment is a big misunderstanding for most people. And in the fact that the half bale will produce more air, and that's a lot of people's argument with it. And the hen itself will produce more air in the blade mode. But like what they forget, or maybe don't know, depending on who you're talking to, is that air plus water equals good, right? Like if I'm getting water down range, I want cool, clean air coming into this building at a high rate. Like I want to move a lot of air if I have water going down range, right? Air entrainment's a problem if we don't have cooling happening. Air entrainment's a problem if we don't have contraction of gases happening, because then we can overpressurize, right? Like that's why the UL didn't test the full fog in a hallway with no opposite vent, right? Like if you ever get to see Keith Stakes in person, ask him why he didn't test that and see what he tells you, but air plus water equals good. And I think what Gary is leading to right here is the ability to cover more solid fuel with less water in that aspect. Because if when you do half bale, you're going to restrict your water flow, obviously. But I think it's a win. And a lot of guys, they would see it as a negative, based on, I guess, maybe their ego or their misunderstanding of water application. Probably more on the ego side, but I think it's a win, Gary. I think it's a win.
Awesome. Nick, what else you got for Kyle on our end?
Boom. I think we hit all of the actual questions that we had at the start of this. No, one more. Sometimes you got to shoot a hostage.
Yeah, that is correct.
Tell us what you mean by that.
I mean, it depends on the situation, I guess. But like, just think of being able to send the message to someone, and it kind of contradicts what we were talking about earlier about being strategic with delivery of messages. This one's a pretty upfront message, right? But like just think of it like a bank robbery. It's like you got a bank robbery, and you're our said bank robber, and you got like 20 hostages, and you got a couple of them acting up. And if you shoot one of them, the rest of them will start acting right, right? So like in the situation of your organization, if you're in the position of leadership, sometimes you have to be pretty direct with people, and sometimes it would benefit the whole to make an example out of one, right? But that's a tough one to navigate, depending on which hostage you shoot. But sometimes it has to happen, bro. Like sometimes
I don't disagree with you. As a father, I don't disagree with you. As a firefighter or officer, I don't disagree with you. So I think there's a lot of wisdom right there. Might not always come across as the most PC thing, but I love it. I love it.
Sometimes it has to happen, man. It's unavoidable.
I probably got one or two others for you here, Kyle. So I know you've talked a little bit about smoothbore versus fog is the wrong debate. Can you give our listeners kind of your reasons behind that?
Oh, yeah. The biggest reason why it's usually the wrong debate is because they're trying to fix a problem that they have to fix with nozzle pressure before they even start talking about nozzle type, right? It's like the majority of people that don't currently use a smoothbore nozzle is because their hose will not support low pressure. So like when they bring the low pressure nozzle into the equation, they have poor results with their hose package, or else they would have been running low pressure already. Like I've never met a fireman that wanted to work harder just because, right? So like if they were already in a package that allowed low pressure and low nozzle reaction, that would be a easier debate to have, right? Now it's just choices. But I think people go wrong with their attack packages in the delivery of that, because they'll put, your low pressure smoothbore on high pressure hose, and it sends a horrible message about the low pressure nozzle if they don't understand their package. because now it's the low pressure nozzle's fault instead of the delivery mechanism, right? So like once you're building these attack packages, like I would recommend that you start at the nozzle and work your way back. Like collectively as a whole, the admin of the fire department have to agree on flow rate, that they all agree is like their baseline, right? Like whether that be 125 or 150 or 160 or 185 or 200 or wherever you're at with it. And like start with that number. Like what is the baseline flow rate that we want at our fire department? And then from there, what I would recommend if you're going down this rabbit hole, if you want to go super deep, would be like, say you're at 100, you settle on 150 gallons a minute, right? I would then test 150 gallons a minute at 100 psi, 75 psi, and 50 psi, and see which one they like. And I can tell you what they're going to like. They're going to like the one with the less amount of nozzle reaction, which is going to lead them in the 75 to 50-pound nozzles range, depending on what kind of fire department you have and how much technique they have. And, from there, that will then lead you to a nozzle pressure, which will then lead you to a nozzle reaction. Like that's the debate we should be having. Like the output side of the end result should be the debate. And then build your attack package from there, right? So if you do that, if we can get into that Goldilocks zone of 60 to 70 pounds nozzle reaction of what feels good to most people, then you can start leading yourself down to a hose debate to start fixing that problem. But I think the biggest problem that people have is that they don't educate themselves enough to have a thought-provoking, fact-based conversation about output of the nozzle. And then it devolves, and I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the problem. Guys wearing stuff like this is a big problem for some of these guys that don't educate themselves, right? But I've tried to give enough free information and have enough public debates with people to bring enough facts to the equation to where all you got to do now is just copy and paste, right? Like all you got to do is just copy some of Dennis's conversations and, my conversations and Gary's conversations and you guys, and you can form your own arguments. But a lot of people just need to get educated and start using those Jedi mind tricks we talked about and being able to form that argument in a way to where they're agreeing to the end result without knowing they're agreeing to the end result, right? So like nozzle pressure leads to nozzle reaction, and nozzle reaction leads to what you're able to do on the fire ground. Like that's the debate we should be having. Like where's your Goldilocks zone? And then from there, once we find the Goldilocks zone, which is the whole point of what your question, the root of your question is, that's the debate. Like, do we have linebackers on our fire department or do we have average dudes on our fire department, right? And if we have average dudes on our fire department, that 50 to 70 range is going to be there. And whether they are more on the 50-pound nozzle reaction side or heading towards the 70-pound nozzle reaction side, then we can start having some debates about how we're going to deliver that output, but don't get lost in the low-hanging fruit, man. It easily devolves into an emotional conversation.
Awesome, man. And then my other one is I basically want you to see if you can repeat a conversation that was had at Mile High with you and Justin. And I think it's cool seeing the guy that loves engine work, you, and the guy that loves search work, Justin. You guys kind of came together, and Justin's not like, oh, search or you suck, and you're not like stretch a line and flow water or you suck. He was very much like, if we don't stretch a line, people will fucking die. And you were also, yes, if searches don't get done, people die. So kind of tell us about that conversation because I think super valuable.
Well, I think were we at the house when we had that conversation? Is that where we had it?
No,
Okay, yeah.
I don't even
I think I know
remember.
what you're talking about. So like Justin comes off abrasive sometimes to some people, and then that people only get one side of that conversation, and then they use the search culture page in a way to only promote search, right? And guys get a hold of Smoothbore Cartel, and then they get to a point to where they only promote engine work, right? And they forget that we both have a piece of that pie. Like we have a contract with the truck company as the engine company, and the truck company has a contract with the unprotected civilian, right? Like we all have a piece of that pie, and with rescue being the objective, right? So like it was cool because I get so many dudes that have come up to me and asked me like, why do I prioritize fire attack over search? Or when would I? Or why would I prioritize search over fire attack, right? Like, and it's hard to have those conversations alone, right? Like it's hard to have that conversation about fire attack without throwing in search in as well. Because gold standard is both those things going on at the same time. I just can't do them both, right? I can't do them both at the same time with one company. Like you have to get your fireground operations moving in a way that we're both having a little bit of that piece of that pie, right? But the piece of the pie for the engine company is that we have a contract. The most important mission on the fireground is the search. And the most important tool in the fireground is the nozzle because we protect the search, right? Like that's the goal. And it was super cool to have that conversation with Justin because we both have followers of our pages, and they're not followers of us. They're followers of what we stand for and the information that we put out, right? And it's easy to get thrown into this camp or that camp, right? And we forget we should all be in the rescue camp. You know what I mean? Like we're all in the same camp. You know, we're just all talking about a piece of that pie for that camp, right? And the engine guys forget that we have a contract with the truck company, whether it's written in your protocols or it's a conversation at the kitchen table or a wink or a finger gun. And when they go across the yard, when they dump through the window, like that's our piece of that pie, right? And the truck guys need to understand more about fire attack. And we need to understand more about search as the fire attack side. And at that point, if we can all come together, we'd be unstoppable in those two operations that are usually performed in the same building at separate times, right? And Cody talks about it in his lecture as well. Like what the freedoms that you have being off the anchor is solely based on our ability to locate and begin extinguishment, right? Like the amount of freedom you have, the amount of success that you're going to be able to have at that moment and not get chased out, right? And it was cool to have that conversation with Justin and know that we're both on the same page, because rarely do we collectively as instructors get an opportunity to be in the same room to where we can talk both of our sides of that coin and find out that we're all saying the same thing. You know what I mean? Like we have to have a collective message, right? And I like that he addressed it on his last scrap and on his search culture page as well. Like, does we all have a piece of that pie, right? Because it's easy to get thrown in this camp or that camp. And then you're the only fire attack guy or you're the only search guy. And then we just have to make sure that we, as the delivers of this message, like Justin was saying, and like I've tried to say as well during everything I've said, is that we're all saying the same thing, man. Like the end goal, the what's on the other side of the equal sign is the same for all of us, right? Should be, at least. And we all collectively have to get better at delivering that message to where it's not misconstrued. And then we have divisiveness between us, right? So I hope I described that well enough.
Yeah, no. I think that kind of conversation, where both sides kind of meet in the middle, and come to a common understanding, super valuable. So I think that was important for people to hear. Well, that kind of ends our questions that we have. And then if the listeners have any other questions, I'm just going to highlight Next Rung here real quick, which this entire show is being donated to Next Rung. That was a charity that Kyle picked when we kind of talked about doing this. Again, Dingus Fire is
and unbeknownst to me, before Blake got the wreck, it just all
yes.
turns out, that's crazy.
Yes. So Dingus Fire is given 250 right off the bat, and then anybody that wants to donate, we have the square link above. But just to kind of give a little tidbit about what Next Rung is, their mission is to help combat mental health issues among firefighters and first responders. We want to be a beacon of hope during these difficult times that many of us face. Mental health issues and an alarming amount of suicides have become a major problem amongst our profession. So a bunch of great guys doing some good things, watching out for us. So If we don't have any other questions, we're gonna wrap up. So give you about 30 seconds to ask your last question if you want.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
I want to know why you picked Next Run, Kyle. And then real quick, just Blake, we're thinking about you, man. Hoping for the best. Keep kicking ass, man. But Kyle, why'd you pick Next Run?
I think it's important. It's an important part that we all never want to admit that we may need one day, right? Like
Yeah.
we're all tough cats and we all have this big, shield, right? And at some point, the cup's going to overfill for all of us, right? Like whether we're going to admit to it or not. And I think having resources like Blake and Next Run, that organization, like in your back pocket and being able to support guys like that, to know that you eventually we will all get to a point where we're going to need to use some of those resources. And then if we don't collectively promote those resources being available, it may end up poorly for us. You know what I mean? Like, and if more guys don't know that those resources are out there, and it's okay to say, hey man, I need some help with this. Like it's a big bravado and ego thing for the fire service, unfortunately. And been a lot of guys that take their own life, man. And it's unfortunate, that it gets to that point. But we're all going to be there to an extent. The cup only holds so much, man. And I really like the fact that number one, that Blake at an early age, so like I've known about Next Run for a long time and he's been consistent with it. And to have somebody to be able to admit, number one, that it's a problem in the fire service, and number two, be ballsy enough to dedicate your life to helping that. You know what I mean? Like it's just something that we should all support, I think.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, well, looks like we got no other questions in the chat, Kyle. But again, man, this is your second time on the show. We love having you. Hopefully, I get to see you soon. I know your schedule kind of gets all tinkered up. Hopefully, it's not July. We have to wait till, but if not, it is what it is.
Yeah, love you guys. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Next Rung, and thank you anyone who was able to donate anything at all today. It's much appreciated. It's great cause.
Awesome. All right.